Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Darshan Shah, the CEO of Next Health and the medical director. And we are here today with a great friend of Next Health, Mr. Jim Kwik, the founder of Kwik Learning. He is the brain coach to the stars. He teaches A-list celebrities, athletes, pretty much everyone you can name. Every name you've probably heard, Jim has taught them how to optimize their brain performance. And you're also the founder of the Kwik Learning podcast, which is one of my favorite podcasts on the planet. Talk about great instructional. I like listen to every episode in a row on a car ride once.
Yeah, I know a lot of people binge listen, if you will.
It was amazing. It was amazing. And I'm also here with Kevin Peake, the president of Next Health, and we're going to have a great talk about optimizing your brain today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you both for having me, and thank you everyone who's here with us.
Yeah.
I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too.
I still have like goosebumps coming out of the cryo chamber, and it's just like a reset for my nervous system. So it's pretty much the best ever.
Yeah, we were just saying how every one of our forefront guests should be in the cryo chamber right before the talk. Is like immediate jolt of energy.
Yeah.
And do you feel kind of the brain, the cognitive effects of it as well?
I do. I've been doing cold therapy now about 3.5 years. And for me, it's a necessity to lower inflammation. For me, especially when I travel, I mean, it must help with you when you land. And
big time. It resets your system every time.
Every time.
It is so important. So I love all this. This feels like, this is like going, like I talk about superheroes a lot. It feels like this is like Iron Man's like med center where he goes for cellular repair, and Captain America gets his serum to be a super soldier.
Right. That's what we are. We're like the Hall of Justice, you know?
There you go.
So let me ask you, how does one become the brain coach to the stars? How does that happen?
It's interesting when people see me on stage or they watch me on video. I'll do these demonstrations, right? I'll have 100 people stand up and introduce themselves, and I'll memorize all their names. Or members will give me 100 numbers or 100 words, and I'll recall them forwards and backwards. But I always tell people I don't do this to impress you. I do this to express to you what's really possible. Because the truth is, every single person who's here listening to this could do that and a lot more. We just weren't taught. If anything, I believe we were taught a lie that somehow our intelligence, our memory, our focus, our potential is somehow fixed, like our shoe size. But we've discovered, we've discovered more about the human brain probably in the past 10, 15 years than the previous 1,000 years. And what we found is we're grossly underestimating our own capabilities. And science has proved it, again and again. You're talking about neurogenesis and neuroplasticity. And we find that I feel like the reason why we can't tap that potential is because we just weren't taught. You think about our 20th century education, which prepared us for a 20th century world, which at the turn of the century was working really in assembly lines and factories and farms, people follow simple orders. But now we live in an age of autonomous electric cars and spaceships that are going to Mars. But our vehicle of choice when it comes to education or learning is really it's like a horse and buggy, a horse and carriage. And you wonder why everyone who's listening to this, I think everyone can relate to overload. Right? I talk about superheroes and superpowers. I'm not leaping over tall buildings and shooting lasers out of your eyes, but we all have a unique ability. We all have a certain, strength, skill set, if you will. But there's these challenges that this generation is facing more than any previous generation, and it's really driven by this digital age. I can name just a few of the supervillains I think people could relate to, and number one is digital overload. Too much information, too little time. The amount of information is doubling at dizzying speeds, but how we learn it, read it, absorb it is pretty much the same. But that growing gap creates a real big health concern, information anxiety. The new term is information fatigue syndrome, higher blood pressure and compression of leisure time, more sleeplessness. Even if something gets canceled, let's say you have a meeting canceled, a lot of people can't enjoy that time because their mind's still multitasking, right? So digital overload. And then I would say digital distraction. That's a big one, right? I mean, how do you maintain concentration in a world full of distraction, app notifications, social media alerts? And so people read a page in a book, get to the end, just forget what they just read. You see this meme all over Facebook saying that The human attention span is now less than a goldfish. What are you going to do about that? And then the third one is digital dementia. And you're going to hear more and more about this term in healthcare. We do a lot of trainings at universities, medical students. I train at the Cleveland Clinic for brain health. It's digital dementia is basically where we're over dependent on our smart devices. And so it's keeping our to-dos, it's keeping our calendars, it's doing simple math, in terms of calculator. It's keeping all the phone numbers. I mean, think about, guys, how many phone numbers did you know growing up?
Yeah, at least like 50, 60 phone numbers.
You knew all of them, right? Like
to.
pretty much. But how many phone numbers do you know like right now?
Like 3.
Exactly. And that's
one of them is my own.
Exactly. And it's not that, and people's like, well, Jim, I don't want to memorize 100 phone numbers, 500 phone numbers, and neither do I. But we've lost the ability to remember one. I mean, think about it. We forget, I believe 2 of the most costly words are, I forgot. I forgot to do it. I forgot to bring it. I forgot that meeting. I forgot that conversation. I forgot that person's name. I mean, it's just, and where are these memory lapses coming from? And I like to just compare our memory or our mind like a muscle. It's like use it or lose it. If I put my arm in a sling and I keep it there for 6 months, it's not going to grow stronger. It's not even going to stay the same. It's going to atrophy. And I feel like what digital dementia is saying is we're over dependent on our smart devices, and we've lost even GPS. I was talking to Dr. Daniel Amen, and he was saying we're not getting early detection of dementia because of GPS. Because if you're relying on a piece of technology outside of yourself to tell you when and where to turn, you're not realizing when you would normally have a memory loss, and you're not, or a lapse, and you're not going to the doctors to get checked out. And so again, I think technology is a great tool, and it makes your life more convenient. But just like physical muscles, if you're so dependent on your car all the time or taking the elevator all the time, you're not taking the stairs, you're not using your body, I feel like it's use it or lose it. So I'm a big advocate for not only just physical fitness, but brain fitness, mental fitness. And so the reason why I know this is all possible is because I grew up with a brain injury. And this is why I'm so passionate about it. At the age of 5, I had an accident, head trauma, and it left me with learning difficulties and challenges. So I was put in special classes. It took me an extra few years to learn how to read, 3.5 years to learn how to read. I'd actually taught myself how to read by reading comic books late at night. And that's why I'm so interested in the superhero mythos. Because at the underlining, when I was a child, I just realized that the baseline story of all of these, movies and films and books that we love, the hero's journey, is that one person can make a difference. And I really believe that. And so I grew up with these learning difficulties. At the age of 9, I remember a teacher pointing to me in front of the whole class, talking to another adult, saying, that's the boy with the broken brain. And that it's so crazy. So for the adults that, who have children, or anyone who, says it, was a child at one point, you have to be very careful, because your external words become a child's internal words. And that became my internal conversation. Every time I did badly on a quiz or a book report or an exam, or not picked for the sports team, that which was like all the time, I would just say, oh, it's because I have a broken brain. And it's very dangerous, because when people come to me and they say, oh, I have a horrible memory, or I'm not smart enough, or whatever it is, I always tell people that they have to be careful with their self-talk, because your mind is always eavesdropping on your self-talk. And if you fight for your limitations, you get to keep them. And so people realized the power of their human mind. Like right now, everyone who's listening to this, like you have hundreds of neurons firing off right now, right? And your brain will never be the same just listening to this conversation. If people realized how powerful their minds really were, they wouldn't say anything or think things that they didn't want to be true. And I'm not saying one negative thought or one negative quote or whatever is going to ruin you, right? But any more than eating just a bad meal is going to ruin you for life. But the habit of it, makes a difference. So even a simple hack like, oh, I'm not, I don't have a great memory, just adding a small little word like yet at the end, right? I'm not physically, as fit yet. And it changes because I remember I was preparing to run a marathon, right? Which is a lot of pressure when your name is Kwik, right? And it really is my last name. I didn't change it to do this. My father's name, my grandfather's name. But there's one part of the book, the one chapter on the psychology of running a marathon, because that's what I was really interested in. And it said this verbatim. because I'm a memory expert. It said, your brain is like a supercomputer and your self-talk is a program it will run. So if you tell yourself you're not good at remembering names, you will not remember the name of the next person you meet because you program your supercomputer not to. And, if there's a message people are listening here, it's just to, sometimes I have a lot of our thoughts. They say we have about 60,000 thoughts a day. We're just not all conscious of it, but we're always running these scripts. And the problem is a lot of those came like when I was a child, when I was 5 years old, 9 years old, they were imprinted on us. So, it's just to be aware. I think self-awareness is really a modern day superpower. Know yourself and really know that conversation that you're having and just be able to step out saying, is this really true? Or is this something that, I picked up when I was younger?
About a year ago, I came to a realization kind of similar to what you're explaining, and I decided to take the word stress out of my vocabulary. And it's right when we were in the thick of, building Next Health and going through all the craziness of, creating this company from scratch. And I was just so stressed out all the time. I said, you know what? I'm going to remove that word from my vocabulary and I'm never going to use it to describe myself anymore because I found it being my default, right? People say, oh, how are you doing? What's going on? Oh, I'm stressed out right now. I'm stressed out. I'm like, of course I'm stressed out. It's all I'm talking about. So I changed it from stress to I'm challenged right now because I love challenges and I love competing and I love winning. So just that little shift was one of the biggest personal breakthroughs I've ever had because all of a sudden, everything that was this stressful environment to me became a challenge to overcome that I was looking forward to rather than like dreading and being tormented by it. So I love hearing that because that's what I experienced.
I love that because there's so much power behind these words and we're not conscious of it, especially the internal talk because it's inside. So we're not really doing that audit. Even little things. I did a podcast episode on the power of gratitude. It was a Thanksgiving episode and how gratitude rewires your brain and helps you go into these different brainwave states and forgiveness and everything. But even a little change, where a lot of people come and they say, oh, I got to pick up the kids. I got to work out. I got to journal. I got to meditate. Even just changing a word like got to get. One little letter from an O, I get to work out. I get to pick up my kids. I get to journal and meditate today. It changes the feeling behind something, right? So I love that. I think, people paying attention to their words is so very, very, very important.
Exactly.
They could change your words, change your life.
Yeah. When I was in high school, I picked up Tony Robbins. Back then it was tapes, like there were actual tapes of Tony Robbins, audio Robbins. And I remember just listening to them over and over again. And then those words got imprinted into my head. And so, Tony Robbins made a huge kind of shift in my mentality from a mentality of just not being able to do things that I could do everything. And I was just listening to those words over and over again. And I think it's so immensely powerful to have the right words. And
it is. I do an annual event. So we do a quick brain conference. And our audience is really interesting. We have like the founder of WordPress and Don Miguel Ruiz wrote the 4 Agreements and Quincy Jones was at our last event, right? And we just celebrated his 85th birthday. He's amazing. I had to pull him on stage, and because it was just an opportunity there. And I asked him this question about challenges. Specifically, the word I used was problems, which it was interesting. I was like, I want to know. I know all your successes. Will Smith and Oprah and We Are the World. That everyone knows that. But I want to know what the problems were and how you overcame the problems. He was like, he looked right at me and he said, Jim, I don't have any problems. I was like, no, but back then, what were the big problems? He was like, no, I didn't have any problems back then either. And I'm like, I'm sure like everyone, everybody has problems, right? Because you're not, he's like, no, I have puzzles. You know what I mean? And he's just like, and same thing with yours, with challenge. It's a different frame on it, right? Yeah. A puzzle is fun. It's a game and it implies there's a solution, right? And it's a challenge. And so it changes everything. Right. And I think another word besides stress that people use, because I could appreciate you doing that audit is this word busy. You ask, somebody how their day is, they're like, I'm so busy. And people start building an identity around being busy. It's like a badge of honor. And really at a meta level, I think what we're communicating to somebody is we're telling them we're important Because if you're not busy, then you're not important, right? But if you're really busy, then you must be really important. And I'm not saying we all in some way do this. I don't know anyone who doesn't. I'm certainly guilty of it also. But the person we hurt actually, because we get secondary gain, right? We start getting apathy or sympathy or, oh, is it okay? And understanding. And so we more likely to do it. And then we wonder why we design our whole life around being busy all the time and why we're so stressed all the time, because we want that identity. And so, yeah, I think currency for me, even thinking about it, peace of mind is really up there in terms of, the reward. Because if somebody is really, really super busy, and I understand hustling and all that, then I would just maybe step out and saying, maybe there's a better way of not just working hard, but working smart around it. Yeah.
Smarter, right. So speaking of, the self-talk that we have in our head, sometimes I find myself just driving and I'm having 1,000 thoughts a second, basically. And it's kind of, when I started meditating a few years ago, like I really started listening to my internal monkey mind and how crazy it gets out of control sometimes. And I think a lot of it also comes from multitasking all the time. Yeah. And we have, our brains kind of almost default to this multitasking mode, and we're thinking about 100 different problems 100 different puzzles at the same time. And I wonder, is like meditation a tool that you use, or how do you control some of that crazy information flow, monkey mind in your brain? Because I know you have thousands of thoughts all the time as well.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely all do. I think everybody could relate to this monkey mind where where it's just going and it's hard to quiet, especially when you need to quiet down. Maybe you're trying to go to sleep, or you're trying to meditate. And what I would say, a number of things here. Well, first of all, the human brain can't be on full steam all the time, right? You can't have the gas on all the time. It helps to go from that state to a state of white space. So I think it's really important. The challenge is going back to those digital villains, in terms of overload and distraction and dementia, is our smart devices have really rewired our brains to be distracted. I mean, every time you scroll through your whatever social media and you get a like, a comment, a share, you get this, or you watch a cat video and you get this dopamine flood, right? Yeah. And it goes along the motivation learning centers of your nervous system, and it becomes an addiction. One of the most popular episodes I did 2 episodes on changing habits with Dr. BJ Fogg, and he runs the Influence Lab at Stanford University. And now he's a habits master, right? And one of his students co-founded Instagram. And do you know, guys, how often the average person opens up Instagram? How many times they check it a day?
I don't want to know, right?
What is it?
150 times a day.
That's
like, if you, like, I don't do that 150 times, but if you're thinking, I only open it 20 or 30 times, that means somebody is opening it up a whole lot more, right? The average is 150, but it's, they pay these scientists, right, to be able to help design these platforms so they are addictive, so you spend more time there and they make more money, right? Now, I'm again, when I talk about technology or social media, I feel like it's a tool. And so I'm not saying throw the baby with the bathwater. I'm saying that it's great. I want to stay in touch with my friends. I want to see what I want to learn and watch inspirational videos and get, get good instruction and stuff. And yet the challenge is when it becomes so addictive, meaning technology, like fire, it is not good or bad. It could heat up your food, cook your food, or it could burn down your house. And I would say same thing with technology, but here's the thing. If you're picking up your phone out of boredom or out of just unconscious habit, then here's the thing. Technology is a tool for you to use, but if the technology is using you, then who becomes the tool? You know what I mean? And that's, so I would say that we have the responsibility. And so one of the ways to lower and mitigate this level of distraction is to be able to have conscious thought and control like our environment. I'm not saying break up with your phone, but sometimes I think everyone could appreciate this, disconnect to reconnect, get out, get grounded, get out in nature. Because the human brain really wasn't, especially the worst habit people have. And I have a video, it's been seen 35 million times. It came out just 2 months ago about the worst habit people have in terms of productivity killer is touching your phone the first time, first hour of the day. Because what you do when you're in that alpha, theta, your relaxed state of awareness, you're very impressionable and suggestible. You pick up your phone, you're rewiring your brain to be distracted, number one. and you wonder why you can't concentrate when you're at work or you're studying in school. But the second thing you're rewiring your brain to be is reactive. And that's very dangerous also. If you're an entrepreneur, you're a student, you're a parent, you have a vision for your life and for your family, your business, whatever it is, you can't be reacting to things. You know what I mean? You can't, and you know this, and people listening you get one bad voicemail message when you wake up or text or email or whatever, and you're in that calm state. It could just ruin your day the rest of the day. I have a friend, Brendan Burchard, and he says, your inbox is nothing but a convenient organizational system for other people's agenda for your life. You know what I mean? So if you just check your phone and this is the first thing you're doing and you're fighting fires, you're on the defense. Like, how are you going to design an incredible day, right? If you're just responding and reacting to things, as opposed to, for me, I write down 3 things I need to do professionally and 3 things I have to do personally. And they don't have to be huge things, but these are like important things, like focal points in my life. I always tell people the most important thing is to keep the most important thing the most important thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
Put first things first. Most people are stressed because they're just everywhere. They overcommit. Right. And that's why, and then they say, if you have to say no to good so you could say yes to great. Like, you could do anything. Anyone listening to this, watching this, they could do anything, but they can't do everything. And a lot of people are stressed because it's self-imposed, because they agree too much to other people and they become a martyr and they're spread too thin and they have way too many tabs open on their laptop and they wonder why it crashes, why we're crashing, why we have no mental energy, we're lacking motivation. But all that energy is being put into these different places. And we really have to do a real, again, audit and check in with ourselves. And so my thing is, don't be reactive, because what I would expect people who are listening to this right now, they take responsibility because they are self-selecting, listening to this because they want to grow so that they could grow in other areas, right? As opposed to just be at the effect. And the metaphor that I use, because we learn through words, we also learn through metaphors, right? And so one of the metaphors I like to use is, let's say, a thermometer versus a thermostat. So if you look at a thermometer, what's the primary function of a thermometer? What's its only job? It does what?
The temperature.
Exactly.
Right.
And literally it just reacts to the environment. It literally is just reacting to the environment. And human beings react to the environment. We react to the weather. Sometimes we react to politics. We react to how clients treat us. But in actuality, the most happy and most successful people have the locus of control on the inside, because they're more of a thermostat, meaning a thermostat doesn't react to the environment. It gauges the environment, but then it sets a temperature or a goal or a vision, and what happens in the environment? It raises to be able to meet that. So it affects the environment instead. And I feel like people who have a vision for their lives, they're creators, right? They have a vision for their family or for their business. They're the ones that take the invisible and they make it visible, right? Because success is that inside out process. But I really feel like it's mindset, but the challenges in school. And again, this is not a slight against teachers. My mother actually became, she didn't know how to help me when I was going through my learning challenges. So she became a special education teacher. Teachers are some of the hardest working people I know and underpaid, but it's like a system issue. You know what I mean?
Sure.
They say if Rip Van Winkle, the guy who slept for decades, if he woke up today, the only thing he would recognize are our schools because the world has changed so much, but our schools haven't as much. And so we're not really preparing. School is a great place to learn what to learn: math, history, science, Spanish. But there are 0 classes on how to learn. Like, how do you focus? How do you concentrate? How do you think critically? How do you solve problems? How do you listen? How do you take notes? How do you study? And how do you read faster? How do you remember things? And that's literally, I just named every single episode of our podcast.
Exactly. Yeah.
And, because I want to fill in those gaps, the classes we should have learned that would really help people right now, as opposed to just memorizing random facts about things that we would just never use.
Absolutely. You talked a little bit about your morning routine, and I find that to be the most powerful part of my day is my first 1 or 2 hours in the morning. And so really just designing a routine around that has been transformative for me. And I always like to ask smart people like yourself, what is your morning routine? You said a little bit of it with writing down your 3 goals for the day. Yeah. Could you go through that a little bit? Yeah, I'd love to hear your morning routine.
Okay. So the idea behind this, and I did a whole show on this, is that if you want to win the day, you got to win the first hour because there's positive momentum. right? And the first hour of the day, hopefully is you could do the best you can to, you can't ever control everything, but you have sometimes the most influence. It's a little bit more difficult. You have kids and all these different factors, but once you start your day, then anything could come up, right? So if you want to win the day, you win the first hour. And that's not my idea. It's just, you've heard this. Everybody has a morning routine. Tony Robbins does, Tim Ferriss does, Oprah has their morning routine. For me, I do 10 things every morning. And my focus is to jumpstart my brain. Because the whole premise that I believe is that our brain controls everything, right? It is the focal point. It is the lead domino that affects everything. Our health, our relationships, our career, and everything. So we have to dial this in right. And so the first thing I do when I wake up is I remember my dreams. And so I have an actual 6-step process, an episode I did on how to remember your dreams. And you're like, Jim, that's so weird. I've never heard that in a morning routine before. But the reason why I do is because people don't realize this. We were talking earlier about the power of sleep, right? And how it's like the ultimate life hack. If you don't get enough sleep, all the techniques, aren't going to have as much punch, right? But the reason why you sleep is because, it consolidates short to long-term memory. It cleans plaque that could lead to brain aging challenges. The other reason from a cognitive standpoint that I like to state for entrepreneurs or anybody who wants to level up their life is that the dream states, because people don't realize this. When you're learning all day or you're building your business all day, your brain doesn't shut off at night. If anything, it's more active at the nighttime. And they've shown this. And so you're coming up when you sleep in your dream state, solutions and ideas and inventions. The challenge is when people wake up first thing in the morning, you have that dream, right? But then after a few minutes, what happens? It just disappears, right? And so I have a system for having people to recall that. But just as for reference, so people understand the power of this, a lot of things in our culture came from dream states. People don't realize this. So Mary Shelley came up with Frankenstein in her dream. Paul McCartney came up with the song Yesterday in his dream. Elias Howe, he's an inventor. He came up with the sewing machine in his dream, right? The periodic table, that framework for it came to a chemist in his dream. So my question for people listening is, what are you dreaming about late at night that could be good for your family, your business, your life, and you're forgetting it? So that's a resource that's there. The second thing I do when I wake up, and I won't go through everything, but just to give people an idea, is I make my bed. And the reason why is because I believe how you do anything is how you do everything. And going back to the science of positive momentum, you want to start your day with excellence. And how long does it take to make your bed? Like a minute or two, right? But you could do one thing with excellence from there, and then you could start stacking, because success breeds success, right? And so, even in the military, right? Sure. They teach you to do it, and it's impeccable. So you could have an impeccable, excellent life. The other reason why you do it, though, is when you come back after a long day and people ask you how your day, you're like, I crushed it. And then you do everything, and then you go back to bed, you're coming back full circle to success. You know what I mean? From there, I do these things in no particular order. I will brush my teeth. And you're like, Jim, what does that have to do with your brain? I think hopefully everyone's brushing their teeth, but I brush my teeth with the opposite hand, because people don't realize this. People know that there is a mind-body connection, but it's less known that there's a body-mind connection. It's a two-way street, that using your body in certain ways actually, now your brain is part of your body, right? But using your body in certain ways actually stimulates different parts of your brain. And we know this from even if somebody, God forbid, has had a head trauma, like I've had 3 traumatic brain injuries, or stroke. And if they have like a stroke on the left side, if there's paralysis, it'll manifest usually on the right side, right? Because the left side controls the right side and so on. So, but people don't realize that by using my left side of my body, it can help stimulate different parts of my right side of my brain. There's a study done at Oxford University about jugglers, that jugglers actually have bigger brains. The act of just going on YouTube, learning how to juggle like your socks or whatever, will actually create more white matter. And so there is this clear connection. So I like to encourage people to brush their teeth with the opposite hand or eat with the opposite hand. There's a study done by Dr. Lawrence Katz, and he wanted to know how to keep senior their brains alive as you grow older, greater focus, memory, and cognitive performance. And a lot of the activities that were science proven, the research was just using the opposite hand throughout your day. little things like that. And that's something we could all do. And the other reason why you do it is it makes you present. It puts your mind in the moment, as opposed to a lot of times we're thinking in the past or in the future or wherever it is. It gets us present. I also drink water. One of the first things I do every single morning, and that's kind of obvious, but we lose a lot of water through respiration, perspiration when we sleep. The brain, the body, 70+% water. And so hydration is obviously very important to that. I also work out for about 3-4 minutes first thing. And there's a lot of studies done. There's a study done in Appalachian State basically saying that they had people working out at 7 a.m., 1 p.m., and 7 p.m. And they went in terms of sleep and weight loss and everything, and found that people who did it first thing in the morning, they got better results. And I don't do my whole workout in the morning because I don't have the time. I'm not set up for that. But just 3 or 4 minutes getting my heart rate going is very powerful. And again, and whatever's good for your heart is generally good for your head. Blood flow, oxygen, and so on. I'll take my shower, and we talk a lot about cold therapy, so I'll take a cold shower. I prefer cryotherapy myself, but I feel like it's important for people even who are listening to this. I do it just for a nervous system reset also, but I cycle between cold and hot. But the other reason I do it is because it's difficult. Like people like, oh, I love this guy until he got tough about saying, cold showers. But I feel like, again, how you do anything is how you do everything. And I feel like by doing difficult things, it helps build this fitness, emotional fitness, or grit, resilience, if you will. And that shows up during difficult times, like when you need to go do that meeting or talk to that person you're attracted to or manage your team. You put yourself in difficult situations, so you build that muscle, and it expands in different areas also. And so I do all these. I make a green drink and a brain power smoothie. I talk about my favorite brain foods. And I know you had Max Lugavere, who's a friend of mine, also on the show before. And I showed Max how to memorize the 10 foods that he talks about, so he could do it forwards and backwards. But I believe what you eat matters, especially for your gray matter, right? And so avocados and blueberries and broccoli and olive oil, eggs, all of those neuroprotective. From there, I journal. I find that there's people ask me all the time, what's your definition of genius? Is it really, and I do not say IQ. I could show anybody who's listening to this how to hack an IQ test. And I don't like it for a number of reasons. Number one, just because people think you take this test when you're a child and that's your number for the rest of your life and it's fixed. I don't like that fixed mindset. One of my favorite books actually is a book called Mindset. It's a must read for anyone's listening to this by Carol Dweck. Difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And I would say the other thing about IQ tests is like standardized tests. Think about the SATs. It was like verbal and mathematical. And that's supposed to be yours. SAT score that you're going to get into universities and get a job, and everything was predicated on that linchpin, right? And that doesn't even make sense to me, because I'm thinking there are so many more, there are other areas of intelligence and genius besides math and the ability, the verbal. And so I'm thinking things like, what about interpersonal intelligence? People who are great with people. That's pretty up there in terms of genius. What about intrapersonal? What about artistic or visual spatial skills? People are great artists or great graphic designers. What about musical intelligence? What about kinesthetic physical intelligence, the athletes, the dancers? There's great research done by Howard Gardner out of Harvard that talks about multiple intelligence theory. And so, but when I think about genius, I think about pattern recognition. I feel like the people who are geniuses in finance and fashion and technology and health and fitness, they see patterns other people don't see. And one of the patterns I recognize when I study genius is a lot of geniuses journal. And think about what Da Vinci's journals are worth, or Einstein's, or Edison's, right? Or Madame Curie, or like, it's just, they're priceless. But it makes me think, is it because they're geniuses that they're journaling, or is it because they're journaling all the time and reflecting and making notes that they become experts, and genius and masters at their craft? So I like to journal, and I have a whole process of journaling, and I've done, a whole episode on note-taking and journaling, and there's a gratitude portion of it. in setting my intentions for the day, and also remembering my day. I feel like, yes, I teach people how to remember foreign languages and facts and figures lightning fast. And I feel like the three things that are most important to remember are your loved ones, your for example, I lost my grandmother of Alzheimer's when I was 8 years old. I mean, it's interesting how these childhood experiences shape who you are in terms of, what becomes valuable to you. And I remember, she calling me by the wrong name, or just talking to her, and then she's talking about something, just 3 minutes later about the same thing, right? And it made me, become very passionate about this. So I spent a lot of time in nursing homes and senior centers, not teaching them how to improve their memory, but just having them share stories, having them polish off their memories, because there's so much to learn, right? From that. So part of me journaling is not only remembering your loved ones, but also your life. So that's the second L, because I think if your life is worth living, it's worth remembering, and journaling helps you to do that. But most people don't even remember what they had for breakfast, But if you want to train yourself to have that episodic memory, to be able to remember things in time, especially those magical moments, journaling helps you with that. Great exercise. And the last thing is your loved ones, your life are your lessons. Right? Because there's this saying that we've all heard before: insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And I've heard that many times. I'm thinking, maybe that's not insanity. Maybe it's just a result of a poor memory. You're doing things over and over again because you don't remember the lesson. And I would say that that's why it's so important to have a good memory. People like, why do I have to have, I did this whole program at Google recently. And they're like, Jim, there's a good question. Like, why do we need to remember all this stuff? Because we have a search engine that could tell us all this stuff. And I explained to them, to get this aha kind of moment, is just our life is a reflection of all the decisions we've made to this point. I mean, we can pretty much, if we own our life, it's pretty much, it is because the sum total of the decisions we've made. But you can only make a good decision based on information that you know, right? The knowledge that you have. And if you have that knowledge, it presupposes that you remember it, right? And here's a perfect example. If the two of you or anyone who's here listening, if you forgot half of everything you knew, half the words, half of your career, half of the people you know, how functional would you be, right? Not very at all. That's how important human memory is. Socrates says learning is remembering. And I thought it should have been the fourth R in school: reading, writing, arithmetic. But what about recall? What about retention? What about remembering, right? You learn something in school, and then the forgetting curve is like 2 days afterwards, 80% of it is gone. And people know this. Most people didn't study in school, if they're honest. They cram the night before. The next morning, they go to breakfast. Nobody could talk to them because they don't want anything to spill out of their head. And they can't wait to take the test. And then after they've done taking the test, what happens? Information is what? It's just gone.
Mm.
And, why spend all that time learning something if you're just going to forget it? And that's the thing. People go to all the conferences, they listen to all the podcasts, and that's great. And I have two comments on that. It's basically saying that, one of my other favorite books is a book by my mentor, Dr. Stephen Covey, who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, right? These are the 7 habits of most effective people. And the 7th habit that he reserved for the 7th habit is sharpen the saw. Meaning that if you have all this wood you need to cut, and we all have metaphoric wood to cut, things, our to-do list, everything that's on there. But if you have a saw with a dull blade, it's ludicrous to spend hours and days suffering and struggling and sweating, being inefficient, trying to cut that wood, right? With a dull blade. You always want to sharpen it first. But I believe in the whole hearts of like what I teach is that learning comes first. That if knowledge is power, learning is your superpower. Sharpen that first. Because if there was a genie right here, and this genie, Aladdin's genie, and they would grant you any one wish, what would you wish for? You would wish for more wishes, right? I want 1,000,000 wishes, right? That's the hack, if you will. But if I was your learning genie in that same spirit, I'm your learning genie, I could grant you one wish to help you learn any subject, skill, anything faster. What would you ask for? You think Spanish, Mandarin, marketing? What would you think? Learning how to learn. Because that would be the equivalent of asking for more wishes. Because if you could learn how to learn faster, you could apply that towards Mandarin, martial arts, music, marketing. It doesn't matter. Everything in your life gets easier. So I think that if there was one skill to master in the 21st century, it's your ability to learn faster. And so that's why our podcast, Quick Brain, our company, Quick Learning, is all about helping people to be faster, smarter, and better in those areas.
I think that's so important, especially given the fact that we're on a podcast right now, because I feel like I'm guilty of this. When I started listening to podcasts, I went through this phase where I was just one podcast after the other, thinking, oh, this is great.
Mm-hmm.
I'm absorbing all this information, but it's in and out. So I finally got to a place where I was like, I need to slow down.
Mm-hmm.
Let me listen to a podcast. Let me take a break and then put it into action.
I love that.
Because it's like without putting it into
that.
action, it's going away and it's just going into this mass of whatever it goes into. So I think it's really important to actually stop and implement before just jump, because it's so easy today. I mean, it's literally you press another button, you're right to the next one and the next one.
Because
so we
you
got to put it in action.
Fix, people love the novelty. And I literally have goosebumps. Kevin, what you're saying, I call them truth bumps. Because I believe the biggest lie in this high performance, self-development industry is that knowledge is power. It's not. It's only potential power, and only becomes power when you apply it. Because all the podcasts, seminars, coaching, whatever, none of it works until you do, until you work.
Exactly.
Right. And that's the thing. And so we have to, so my drive, I believe that we started this conversation with our self-talk and the power of words. I think the power of words, as you build on it, and we talked about power metaphors, which is also words. Another way of using it is the power of questions. I think the questions we ask ourselves on a daily basis define a lot of our focus and our reality, meaning that any given time, the human brain could focus on 2 billion different stimuli, right? You think about all the stuff that's going on in your environment, internally and externally. And so primarily, I look at the brain as a deletion device. It's always trying to delete, and just because you can only pay attention to so much. If you didn't filter all that noise out, we would go crazy, right? And so what determines what you focus on, one of the things are, besides your values, are things you ask questions about. And questions really are the answer. So perfect example, going back to the SATs. If you're reading all this in school, they teach you to go read the reading comprehension, and then here are 10 questions they're going to they ask you at the end, and hopefully you have an answer for those. Why, just common sense, why wouldn't you just read the questions first and then read the actual, passages, and then what the author's looking for, and then you're like, there's an answer, there's an answer, there's an answer. Because what you're doing is you're activating that part of your brain, the reticular activating system, RAS, where it determines what's important to you. Like, for example, years ago, my sister sent me emails and postcards with this dog. It was a pug dog, right, with this smushy little face. And I was like, why is she sending me that? And that's my question. Why is she sending me this picture of these pug dogs? And I realized her birthday was coming up. So I knew what she was implanting in my head, right? And guys, everywhere I started to go, I would be at the grocery store. Somebody was like cashing out holding a pug dog. And I'd be running in my neighborhood, and I swear to you, somebody was walking 6 pug dogs. And my question for everyone listening is, where were those pug dogs before? Did they just show up magically? No, they were always there, but they weren't part of the 5 to 9 bits of information I was paying attention to. I was deleting those. It never became important until I started asking the question. So my question for you is, when you're reading and you get to the end of the page, have you ever read a page in a book, got to the end, and just forgot what you just read?
Yep.
Totally.
And you go back and you reread it, and you still don't know what you just read, right? And one of the reasons why is we don't have questions. Because if you had questions about, like, I never pick up a book or listen to a podcast or go to a conference or anything without questions. Because then if you have questions, you're like, oh, when you're reading, there's a pug dog, there's a pug dog, there's a pug dog, right? And so I'm always looking for that. Now, this will blow people's minds. There's a question you're asking yourself every single day, because it's your dominant question. Because really, when it comes down to thinking, we do a whole program. We have kind of the Udemy Khan Academy of accelerated learning. So we have students in 180 countries. We have a 30-day speed reading program, a 30-day focus program, a 30-day memory program. One of the most popular programs we have is a thinking program, like how to think, solve problems, make decisions. So how do you think faster, right? Everyone wants to think faster, because this is where because nobody listening to this is paid for their brute strength. You're paid for your brain strength, right? You're not paid for your muscle power. You're paid for your mind power. And the faster you can learn, the faster you can earn. I don't just mean financial. That's obvious. But I mean all the treasures of our life, right? You can learn. I mean, there's a book out there that can pretty much solve most of the challenges that most people face, right? And what I love about it is if somebody has decades of experience, like the two of you, and they say put it into a book, and you can sit down in a few days and read that book, and you can download decades into days. That saves you the number one resource you have outside your brain, which is your time, right? Because the time is the one thing that you can't get back. But going back to being a quicker thinker, when the thinking is nothing but the process of asking and answering questions. And if people are listening to this saying, is that true? Notice in order to think about it, you had to ask a question. Is this true? Right? So you have questions you ask on a regular basis, and there's some that you ask more than others. And so, for example, I have a friend, and we went through this process, and we found out one of the questions she asks herself all the time is this question: how do I get people to like me? Now, you don't know this woman. You don't know how old she is. You don't know her ethnicity. You don't know her financial status. You don't know anything about her, but you know a lot about her. Like if a woman asked herself, this woman, hundreds of times a day, how do I get people to like me? Tell me about her. Like, what is she like? Her personality, her life.
Insecure.
She's insecure.
Shy.
She's shy. Mm-hmm. She's insecure. What else?
Self-conscious.
She's very self-conscious.
Mm-hmm.
She's a people pleaser, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, when she'll go from one person to another and she changes, like a chameleon, because she's always molding to around people around her, right? And you know all this stuff about her, but you only know one question she asks herself. And so my question for everyone listening, in terms of big aha, I know people are taking notes on this. What are some of your dominant questions? You know what I mean? Like, what are the questions, everyone who's listening to this, what are you asking yourself on a regular basis, consciously and probably 1,000 times a day unconsciously, because that determines the pugs that you're focusing on, right? And so, for example, one of the questions that would really support people going back to just, listening to podcasts and just not applying it is just, what if you ask yourself, like, I'm obsessed with these questions. Because I grew up with learning challenges, the boy with the broken brain, I would obsess over this question: how do I make things better? Like, I literally, since I've been a kid, have been obsessed with how do I fix this, because I was broken. So I just want to fix everything and everyone around me. Another question I ask all the time, because I know knowledge is not power. And the reason why I know is because when I started teaching this when I was about 18 years old, I finally hacked my brain. Right. And I went through this whole situation where I was in the hospital because I was overstudying and I didn't know how to do it. So I was living in the library. I wasn't eating, sleeping, working out, spending time with friends, all things that's good with me. I ended up passing out in the library. I fell down a flight of stairs. I hit my head again and I woke up in the hospital 2 days later. And at this point, I was wasting away. I mean, it was the darkest time in my life. I was down to 117 pounds. Right. And I hooked up to all these IVs in the hospital. I thought there had to be a better way. And when I had that thought, the nurse came in with a mug of tea, and on it was a picture of Albert Einstein, which is the opposite of what I thought I was, genius. And on it was this quote that you've heard in different iterations, said, the same level of thinking that's created your problem won't solve your problem. And it made me ask a new question. Notice the theme here, questions. And I was like, what's my problem? It's like, well, I'm a really slow learner. Well, how do I think differently about it? Well, maybe I could learn how to learn faster. And I put my studies aside, and that's when I started studying, personal development and speed reading and meta learning and meta thinking and, mnemonics, 2,500-year-old memory techniques and all the adult learning theory, multiple intelligence. I started pouring myself into it. About 60 days into it, a light switch went on, and I just started to understand things for the first time. I read my very first book cover to cover. You know what I mean? And I just started to apply it, and my grades shot up, and so did my life. But the reason why I'm here with you gentlemen here today, 25 plus years later, is because I started to teach this to other people. Because I was so upset that I struggled for a decade and a half every single day. My whole identity, felt like I lost my childhood because I was suffering when I could have learned these simple things. And I was like, why wasn't taught in school? So I started to teach, and I started to tutor. And one of the first people I was tutoring, she was a freshman. This will blow your mind. She read 30 books in 30 days after going through my tutoring. And I wanted to find out not how she did it. I know exactly how because I taught her. I want to know why. I'm very interested in human motivation. I did a program recently in Silicon Valley. And after I was done with my talk, Bill Gates comes up to me and he was in the audience. And I asked him, if you could have any one superpower, I asked, asking the superpower questions, what would you be able to do? And he was like, Jim, if I got any superpower, I'd be able to read faster. And I was like, oh, I could totally help you with that, right? And Warren Buffett's like, I probably wasted 10 years of my life reading slowly because people don't realize this, but the average person has to process information about 4 or 5 hours a day. Just process information. Think about emails and blogs and on books, newspaper, like everything you have to process. If you could just double your reading speed and save 2 hours a day, 2 hours a day over the course of years, what's 1 hour a day over the course of a year? 365 hours.
Wow.
Like how many 40-hour work weeks is that? 9 40-hour work weeks, 2 months of productivity you get back saving 1 hour a day and something ubiquitous you're already doing like reading. So when I look at reading, I feel like when people are reading, they're reading so slow, they lose their focus, their mind is wandering, they fall asleep, they're counting how many more pages they have left, all that, because they're cutting it with a dull blade. You know what I mean? So if you learn how to read twice as fast, which everyone who's listening could easily do, and I did 4 episodes on this on my show, then all of a sudden you save an hour a day, 2 months a year. Like people kill themselves to get 2 extra weeks of vacation a year, right? Yeah. So that's why I'm saying working smart. But this young lady, going back to Bill Gates, we had this conversation about the future of education, and we're going deep into it. And I'm talking about accelerated learning theory, and he's talking about technology. And this whole crowd is gathering around. And somebody asked, is there anything missing? You have the theory and you have the technology. And we talked about it some more. It's like, we know it. Motivation. Because a lot of people know what to do, but they're not doing what they know. Because common sense is not common practice. And so what drives people to make change and really follow through with things? What gets people to keep working out or to stick with discipline and journaling and meditation? And then why do they fall off, right? So I wanted to know motivation. And I'm very interested in motivation, the motive for taking action. In fact, when people forget names, I always ask people, I speak in front of 10,000 plus people a month. And I'll ask audiences all the time, who here has trouble remembering names? 95% of people will raise their hand, right? And the 5% probably should, just whatever. And they're not probably paying attention. I was like, okay, fair. And let's say there's a suitcase here, $1 million cash for you, your favorite charity, whatever, tax-free, go home with it. If you just remember the name of the next stranger you meet, who's going to remember that name? 95% of the audience just raises their hand, right? And now it's like, then this is the honest question. As a coach, as a brain coach, I'm like, I'm not there to placate to them. I'm like to call them on their BS. I'm like, okay, just 2 seconds ago, you said you all have memory issues remembering names. Now you're all memory experts. What strategy do you use? Nothing. They didn't learn anything yet, right? But their motivation changed. So it had nothing to do with their ability or their capability. It had everything to do whether or not they wanted to or not, right? And so getting in touch with our own motivation, like even something simple, guys, like ask when you're meeting someone for the first time, asking yourself, why do I want to remember this person's name? And then maybe you come up with an answer. Show the person respect, make a new friend, to do some business, to practice these things I learned from Jim, right? Because if you can't come up with one reason, what's going to happen? You won't remember it. In fact, everyone says they have trouble remembering names, but nobody forgets all names. There are some names you remember. 95% chance you're motivated. That could be a good big client. You're attracted to that, but there's some kind of motivation there. And so what I would say is there's a success formula, and I call it H cubed. Create anything in your life, reach any goal of any vision, anything. Head, heart, hands, right? H cubed, head, heart, hands. That you could visualize things in your head all day. You could set goals in your head, but if you're not acting with your hands, you're procrastinating, you're putting it off, then check in with your second H, which is the heart. This is the story, the emotion, the energy of motion. Like I had a martial arts instructor teach me years ago, you can't steer a parked car, right? And so you need that fuel. And we know this, even in business, for people who are listening, who own their own business or they're in sales, people don't buy logically, they buy emotionally, right? Because everything we do is, because we're not logical, we're biological. I mean, think about the dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, all the endorphins. We're a chemical soup. So we do things through that drive. So if there's a gap between what's in your head and what you're acting with your hands, like knowledge, like everyone has knowledge in your head, right? But they have all these books on the shelf, and it becomes shelf help, not self help, because nobody's doing anything, right? But check in with the heart. So I went back and I checked in with this woman, and I was like, "What's your reason? Why are you doing this?" Because I told her, reasons reap results, right? Reasons always come first. One of my very favorite books, Simon Sinek, Start With Why. Dear friend of mine, what is your why? And she said, Jim, the reason I read these 30 books in 30 days after you taught me how is my mother's dying of terminal cancer. Doctors gave her 2 months to live, 60 days. They wrote her off. And I always get choked up thinking about this. And she was like, the books I'm reading, or she was reading, were books on health, wellness, alternative stuff, energy, everything she can get her hands on. And I was like 18 at the time. I was like, man, I'll say prayers, thoughts, good luck with that. 6 months goes by. I don't hear from her. I get a call one morning. I pick up the phone and this woman's crying. She's crying. And, I can't get a word out of her. And I find out they're tears of joy when she stopped. Her mother not only survived, but it's really getting better. Doctors don't know how, they don't know why. They called it a miracle. But her mother attributed 100% to the advice she got from her daughter, who learned them from all these books. And that's at that moment I realized that if knowledge is power, learning is your superpower. And it's a superpower we all have. It's just unfortunate we live in a climate where we're not taught how to unlock that genius. And that's why I dedicated my life's work ever since then to this. Because I'm the boy with the broken brain. And what lights me up is helping people who are suffering from digital overload, distraction, dementia, all these challenges, struggle. It's not your fault because we just weren't prepared for the world, right? So my goal is to fill in those gaps and leave literally no brain left behind. That's my thing. I feel like it's not just those who have and have not. It's part of it is also those who know and those who do not know, right? And so I want to help people to accelerate that, to keep up with the fast-paced world we live in. And I'm not talking about frantic fast. Like when I read or I teach people to read 2, 3, 4 times faster, it's not like frantic fast. It's the focus and there's a peace of mind because you're not trying to multitask. And for those people who think they're multitasking, let's put an end to this right now. Science has proven, all the research has proven across beyond a shadow of a doubt, there's no such thing as multitasking. Yes, you could ride a bicycle and chew gum and be on the phone, but you cannot do 2 cognitive activities at once, meaning that you can't be doing 2 projects and so on. Really what you're doing is task switching. And every single time you go from task to task, what you lose is time, because it takes anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes on average to regain your focus and your flow, get back into that flow state. So you're actually losing time. And they've shown this even with doctors, that the people will make more errors and more mistakes trying to multitask. So if we want to be able to get more done, focus on one thing at a time.
That's fantastic. I think, everything you said is just so incredible. And what I really love about what you do too is you figured all this stuff out and you're teaching it. And one of the things that I learned from a very young age, just being in medicine, we have this saying, it's called see one, do one, teach one. And so that's my question to ask myself is, everything I read, everything I listen to, if I don't immediately teach it to somebody else, it goes away. And I think that teaching part of learning is also so important. And I always ask myself, like, how am I going to teach this to somebody? And that really makes me do some mental gymnastics in my head to flip it around in my own words and put it out there again. And that's what's really helped me. And it sounds like you've done that with everything that you've learned as well.
Going back to these dominant questions that we ask ourselves all the time. One of them was, how do I make this better? The other 2 questions I ask all the time that I've trained myself to do, that anyone could also do the same, is number 1, when you're reading something, listen to a podcast, even now, as people are listening to this, how do I apply this? Obsess about that question, because that's where you take knowledge and turn it into power. How do I apply this? The second question I would ask obsessively is, how can I teach this to somebody I love? How do I teach this to my spouse, my kids, my team? Because there's 2 reasons to learn anything. Is number 1 is what it could do to enrich your life, but the second is what it could do to enrich somebody else's, right? You're passing on the flame. And you're right. I would challenge everyone who's listening to this right now to, everyone obviously is taking notes. And we did a great episode on the proper way of taking notes, because most people, you're not taught how to take notes. But I would say this, whatever your big ahas are from listening to this or watching this episode, I would challenge people to screenshot this episode right now and either or take a picture of your notes. And what I would ask people to do is to tag us in it, on social media, and teach something. So literally screenshot this episode, tag us so we could see it and maybe even share it, and put your big aha from this conversation, because then you're teaching it and paying it forward. And I would say, because if you had to give a presentation on this, like even re-listen to this episode, if you had to give a presentation in a couple of days, like a little TED Talk, would you pay attention differently? Of course, we had to teach it. Would you take notes differently? Of course. Would you post different questions, like in your post? Absolutely. And what I always tell people is learning is not a spectator sport. People think because they've been trained with the 20th century education that you could just sit there passively and learn. The human brain doesn't learn through consumption. It learns through creation, right? And you cannot sit there quietly and not talk to your neighbor and not get involved, because learning is not a spectator sport. Just like life, you have to get off the bench and get involved and roll up your sleeves and make it active. But what I would say is one of the ways you make it active, besides taking notes and asking questions, is to teach it. Because this is what everyone wants to write down. When I teach something, I get to learn it twice. When I teach something, I get to learn it twice. And so learn with the intention of teaching, and you'll learn it twice as fast.
Jim, can we talk about the Kwik Academy? Or the Kwik, that's really what this is all about. For me, it's definitely, that's such an important thing personally as well. Cause I had learning disabilities growing up also.
Really?
Yeah, I was actually, I was in special ed classes, or categorized in special ed for my entire education. I didn't even realize it. Initially, when I was in elementary school, they put me in special ed. I was probably the worst student out there. I got in tons of trouble. I was kicked out of schools. I had ADD. And, I never had teachers that knew how to harness my energy. And I was never inspired in school, but I was inspired by business. I was selling candy in kindergarten.
Oh, wow.
Right. I started my first company when I was 14 years old. But I could never learn in the classroom.
Right.
And, how they dealt with me when they were younger is throw him in special ed. He's disruptive. He's not learning. He's not following, working within this framework that we've created. And I've always just felt that our school systems are such a disservice, like you have as well. I think we probably all would agree in this. And it's got to be revolutionized. So I would just love to hear more about, what you've created, the framework, and who it really applies to.
Right. And so I believe sometimes systems, first of all, it's amazing what you accomplished, because it's so crazy how people put labels on people. First of all, I remember like all my friends were put in this a group called MASP. MASP stands for More Able Student Program, because they were more able. And so me and my friend Joey were the only two that weren't, part of that group. And so we created our own little club, and we called it LASP, the Less Able Student Program. And but it's interesting. I would say that for anyone's listening, first of all, that's ever been through this kind of experience, or is a parent and is dealing with this, or wants to, to shape, an education system, I think a more empowering question that most people ask: how smart is my kid, right? Or how smart am I? Or how smart is my partner? Or how smart is my team? Or whatever, right? And I think maybe a more empowering question is not how smart are you? It's how are you smart? It's not how smart are you, but it's how are you smart? Because we know there are different learning styles, right? It's just like how one person prefers to learn is not. So for example, if somebody's listening to this right now, and let's say you're really interested, even motivated to learn something, right? And you have that big, that big charge. But have you ever been in a situation where you're in a class or listening to something, and for some reason you're normally interested in it, but you're just not connecting with it for some reason? Usually it's because the way you prefer to learn it is different style than the way the teacher is presenting it. So it's like you're two ships in the night. You pass each other and there's no connection. You don't even recognize the other one is there. It's similar to if I ask everyone right now to take out, as you're jotting down notes, to write your first and last name, right? So just imagine, even if you're not be able to do it and you're driving or something like that, writing your first and last name. Then I ask you to switch hands, and with your opposite hand right below it, your first and last name. And as people go through it, you know what's going to happen, right? The second time it takes longer, it feels more uncomfortable, and the quality is probably not going to be as good. And so it's interesting because sometimes when you're learning something, it feels like that. It takes longer, it feels uncomfortable, and the quality or the output is not quite as good because maybe you're trying to learn it with the opposite hand. You know what I mean? And so if you don't fit that mold, like some people prefer to learn it, and I'm generalizing because there's so many different ways of, so many different distinctions in terms of learning style. Some people really do need to move around, for example, to learn. Like reading is nice, listening is nice, but they really have to roll up their sleeves and get involved. And they move around. They have a kinesthetic process of doing it. And by the way, moving around actually helps with the learning process, right? You create, brain-derived nootropic, BDNF, and fertilizer for neurogenesis and plasticity. We know that people listen to our podcasts when they're on like ellipticals, they're rhythmic movement, they're going to learn it and retain it better. All of that is good for you. But when kids want to move around in class, they're like punished. And how do we punish them? You're like, we don't let them use that energy to go play outside. We like sit down, you're in detention. I mean, it is insane. So my thing is disrupting education is something I'm very interested in. I feel like disrupting systems sometimes very difficult. So that's why I chose to launch our academy more on a podcast, because it's more of a ground up. And because of it, we have lots of people, parents and people of influence in politics listening to it. So it's a great way of doing it and introducing new media there. I believe nowadays a classroom is not limited to four walls. A lot of people believe that once they're done with school, education is done and learning is done. And I think that that's a myth. I think now with technology, and I know you both know Peter Diamandis, who's a good friend. When we're thinking about it, now we have, more computing power on our phones than more access than Clinton had, back then. And, now somebody in a village in some third world country has, as much access as anybody else to the world. And so education really could be, you could have the best minds out of Oxford teaching the masses, right? Where teachers become more facilitators and coaches and laboratories and experiences, which might be really interesting. I think one of the biggest changes I would make in the education system is curriculum. I feel like a lot of people don't learn very well because of relevancy, because people don't see like how the sine, cosine, tangent of X really relates to their life. Like I think about everything that you're doing at Next Health. Like how valuable would it have been to learn how to optimize your mind, your mental and physical performance, right? Like little things, to be able to learn how to have interpersonal skills, to be able to love yourself, to have self-compassion, to be able to learn how to learn. So I think all of those become the curriculum. I think one of the most important things to teach is meta learning, learning how to learn. Because if people could learn how to learn, the reason why, the only thing that's constant is change, right? I read recently that a graduate, someone leaving the school system right now, is going to have anywhere from 8 to 14 careers. Like think about that, not vertical jobs, like because the world is changing so fast. We don't know, like businesses are going, like technology is disrupting. Everything's being automated or artificial intelligence and everything. What becomes something that you can't easily duplicate through a computer and like mass manufacturing? 3 superpowers that we train: creativity, imagination. I really do believe imagination is more powerful than knowledge. Like Einstein said, that, knowledge is what is, imagination is what could be. Everything that you guys have created is, that came from your mind, right? That, that's what entrepreneurs do. They take invisible to make it visible. Third thing I would say is strategy. Nobody teaches you strategic thinking, critical thinking skills. Really, our lives are a reflection of the quality of our thinking, but nobody teaches us how to think in school. So I would focus on that kind of on a curriculum also. And then besides the fact that, we're not even talking about the environment that kids learn, fluorescent lights and, mass-produced processed foods and everything else. And, all the vending machines that have all this sugar. And you wonder why kids are hyperactive. There've been so many studies where they cut the sugar intake and everything else and go back to behavior and learning and focus and everything. So, I mean, there's not one, just like with learning or high performance, there's not one magic pill. I would love it to be the case. But even when I do trainings for medical doctors and caregivers and researchers in the area of brain performance, they're 1/3 of our cognitive abilities, our memory, for example, is predetermined by genetics and biology. So research says about 1/3 set. 2/3 that means is in our control. Then this is the lifestyle. This is a good brain diet. This is killing ants. Automatic negative thoughts, that negative talk we were talking about, exercise. We live in a very sedentary lifestyle. They say sitting is the new smoking. People sitting for 8 hours a day. But the primary reason you have a brain is to control your movement. As the body moves, the brain grooves. You have to move. But kids nowadays, they're not moving. I mean, they're so protected. We're taking swings out, as I said, like they're growing up on their smart devices. It is, they're not getting grounded. They're not, and think about it. Kids need to crawl. They need to move to develop their brain, right? I mean, this is just This is just science, And so brain nutrition, another thing, they go through your tests, get a good, full spectrum, nutrient profile, and see what you're deficient at, because you can learn all the great, I'll go through our podcast, start with episode 1 and go through it, like an academy, online mobile academy for your mind, and I'll fill in all the gaps. But you could do all that and, be short of DHA, or B vitamins, and you're just not going to get the same kind of performance. So I would say that's number 4. Number 5, that's going to move the needle for you, positive peer group, because who you spend time with is who you become. And, they say if you spend time with 9 broke people, be careful because you're going to be the 10th, right? Because who you spend, and there's a science to this too, because you have these mirror neurons, where you're always imitating other people that you spend the most time with, and not only their behaviors, but their attitudes and their habits and their values. And so you have to be very careful, because a lot of people out there, I did trainings with Jim Kwik, prepare him for a film, and we're at his home, and we're making guacamole, which is a great brain food, in his kitchen. I ask him, "Why do you do what you do?" Motivation. I'm obsessed with what drives people. He was like, "Jim, the reason why I act, like a complete fool or so extreme and all these characters on film is because I want to give people permission just to be themselves." You know what I mean? And he's like, "My mission is to free people from the concern of other people." Because I believe personally that people mitigate who they are. They don't fully express themselves because of other people's expectations, right? Because you could go broke buying into the opinions of other people, right? I spent a lot of time, I was mentioning, with nursing homes, helping them fine tune their memories. One of the biggest regrets people have at the end of their days is they didn't live their life. They lived their life, for the Joneses or for their parents or for somebody else, but it wasn't their life. Right. So learn from that. And so be around people, positive peer people that just encourage you, that challenge you, that are kind, that are rooting for you, that educate you, that uplift you, because that's important. Mirror neurons. 6th thing, clean environment is good for your brain, because your external world is a reflection of your internal world. I love your facility because it's like immaculate, right? But this, when people clean their office, they clean their desktop, you have clarity of thought also. 7th thing, sleep. Right. I mean, goodness, like, how's your brain the next day when you get a horrible night's sleep? How's your focus? How's your ability to think? How's your memory? None of that happens. So you got to make sleep a priority. I would say number 8, brain protection, meaning that what will keep you from having your quick brain, as I call it, or is this superhero brain, superhuman brain, is not protecting your brain. Just wear a helmet, avoid extreme, situations or sports, or, and also I did an episode on EMFs. We had a doctor talking about just the challenge. We don't know what your cell phones that you keep right to the side of your brain, the effect it's having on your nervous system. We just don't know. And I read recently over 90% of kids sleep with their phones underneath their pillows.
Oh,
We don't know, right? And so protect your brain. Number 9 and 10, 9 new learnings. If you want to create neurogenesis, neuroplasticity, new brain cells, new connections to the day you die, 2 things, novelty and nutrition. Just like your physical body, you want to build up muscle, you want to build your bicep, give it novelty, stimulus, workout, and then give it nutrition, feed it, right? And then obviously rest. And so, but same thing, if you want to have your brain, you got to learn new things always. There was I don't know if you guys saw, it was on cover of Time magazine. It was a longevity study with these nuns. I call them super nuns because they were living well into their 90s, and they wanted to find out where's the longevity coming from. And to simplify, basically half of it had to do with their gratitude, their emotional faith, but the other half had to do, they were lifelong learners. And because they were lifelong learners, always challenging themselves, reading, conversations, everything, it added years to their life. But not only years to their life to their years. They were good years. And finally, number 10, and this is the invisible one, stress management. People do not realize, if you want to have a quick brain, a fast brain, a functional brain, a super brain, if you will, optimized, stress is one of the biggest. Chronic stress shrinks your brain. I mean, you think about it. Cortisol, adrenaline, it's great for fight or flight, but it's not good if you need to study. It's not good if you need to give a presentation at work, right? And so what coping mechanisms or practices do you have in your routine to be able to lower stress levels, massage or meditation or some of these things. But my main message to everybody is there's not one thing anymore that we could fix education with one thing or learning or health or brain performance. We got to do all that because you could be doing all that and spending time with crappy people and it's going to affect your performance. You could do all that and not sleep. You could do all that, be short of nutrients. You could eat all that and eat fast food. Everything counts nowadays.
Wow, that's an incredible list. Thank you so much. I know personally I'm going to be listening to this podcast a few times. Make sure I get all the notes down. Do some good show notes too.
Yeah, and screenshot it, take a picture of it, tag us all in it. Tag your big aha on there, what were some of your big ahas from it, and post your questions.
I was thinking the same thing. I was like, I'm so glad this is being recorded because you have so many excellent analogies that I want to steal and use.
Right. Yeah, we could talk forever, but unfortunately, we're at the end of this podcast. I can't wait to have you on again.
We'll do it.
We're going to Next Health now. We're going to do a talk for about 100 people about some of the same topics and even more. I can't wait to hear that. We'll also have that posted on our website.
Beautiful.
What's your Instagram handle so people can find you?
Yeah, the best thing is, so I do Q&As on Facebook and Instagram and some stuff on Twitter. So it's all at Jim Kwik. You just have to spell it right, Kwik. So connect there. We post some really good stuff. And then the podcast, just search your podcast app for my name, Jim Kwik, Kwik. And we do episodes on, I actually teach people how to memorize these 10 things forwards and backwards I just did. We talk you how to show you how to change your habits, how to be able to have focus, how to learn languages faster. We just did an episode on how to study and we made the front page of the LA, the site, the LA Times for students. And I did 2 episodes on how I teach actors how to speed read scripts and memorize their lines. So anyone who has to do sales presentations or little TED Talks, very, very useful. But start with number 1 and download all of them. And because it's meant to be an online academy, and every single episode is only 10, 15 minutes long because they're basically brain hacks for busy people who want to learn faster and achieve more. So you can go to kwikbrain.com and get the free training and get access to the show.
It's all for free on the internet. I love it. Thank you so much, Jim. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.